2020 Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg going after President Trump for exploiting identity politics. Listen.
Now, I'd like to comment on one of the buzzwords of our time, so-called identity politics. Many of the objections come from the right, which is ironic at this time because the current administration has mastered the practice of the most divisive form of such politics, peak white identity politics, designed to drive apart people with common interests. And we have a crisis of belonging in this country.
So that sort of touches on one of the many topics that bad boy author, he's always been called that, Bret Easton Ellis, covers in his new book, which is called White, in which he takes aim at, quote, relentless anti-Trump fixation, coastal elites, corporate censorship, Hollywood identity politics, Generation Wuss, woke cultural watchdogs, the obfuscation of ideals once both cherished and clear. Here now to talk about why this book is getting a lot of praise and a lot of backlash, which is the way he likes it, and the comments from Pete Buttigieg is Bret Easton Ellis. Bret, good to see you. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me, Martha.
So, I guess first of all, just because it kind of touches on some of what you get at in this book, Pete Buttigieg, who's running for president, has talked a lot about his white privilege and how he has accepted the idea that is part of who he is. What do you say to that?
Well, I think identity politics of any kind is a bad idea. But I do think there's something very interesting about Pete Buttigieg that he hasn't talked about, is that his most progressive message that he's sending out there is how mainstream and traditional he is for a quote-unquote gay candidate. And I don't like to solely talk about representation, but there is something quite radical about the way Pete Buttigieg presents himself in a way that is not the norm in a presidential campaign or in politics. So I think there's something about that is interesting about him. Otherwise, I don't know, the whole weaponizing white privilege is...
Well, he talks a lot about the fact that he's, Midwestern, that he was in the armed services, that he is a religious man, and it is a very interesting dichotomy in terms of the person that he is, and I think he's getting a ton of attention for that as well. Talk to me about self-victimization, because you go on in here about if you're a Caucasian adult who can't read Shakespeare or Melville or Toni Morrison because it might trigger something harmful, or such texts damage your hope to define yourself through your victimization, you should see a doctor.
Well, I think victimization and identity politics are intertwined, and they came together during a particular era in the last 10 years. And what happened was identity politics led straight into victimization. A group that felt marginalized or had some kind of grievances suddenly used those grievances to their advantage and started to victimize themselves. And because of that, they got a lot of attention. And so that was the connection that I was making in the book.
So and then they like it, and it feeds on itself, and then other people also want to have the opportunity to be seen as victims, correct?
Yes, that's exactly what happens. And it's kind of this never-ending loop that ultimately, if you're defining yourself by a bad thing, if you're defining yourself by a trauma that happened to you maybe years ago, and you still are defining yourself by that, then you are in a way ill, and you need to process that to move on in society. But to define yourself by a bad thing, a trauma, that's something that turns you into a victim, is not really helping anybody, and certainly it's not helping yourself.
We've been doing a lot of interviews with World War II veterans and the build-up to the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and it just strikes me that there's such a huge difference between what makes these guys tick and what you're talking about, because they're all about getting up and, not talking about the fact that they were injured, not talking about the fact that, that it was them, that it was all about the other people that they were with. Such humility is completely opposite of the individualized society that we live in today.
Well, it was also, I was writing a lot of white during the campus malaise, the big campus protest of conservative speakers, and I was amazed when I saw 18, 19, 20-year-old men who had to go into safe spaces with a pet dog and balloons and cupcakes in order to, in order to feel better about themselves. And then I thought about my grandfather who was on the shores of Normandy, and I thought, what is going on? And a lot of white came from those observations.
All right. Very interesting to talk to you, Bret Easton Ellis. Thank you very much. Thank you.